for joining us. Um, Dr. Catherine Walker Payne is going to be sharing with us today, possibly about a lot of things. Thank you. I sent her a long list of probably about 10 things that we had talked about of potential ideas. So I know that was kind of a big ask. So I think this will be very helpful and informative for everyone, looking at some kind of practical universal design considerations and making sure that we're meeting the needs of our students. So thank you, Dr. Walker Payne, for taking time to put this together for us. And I will turn it over to you. I will monitor the chat if anyone has questions, and you can let us know if you want to hold those till the end or what you want to do. You're still muted.
Great, thank you all for having me. Yeah, I'm happy for you to ask questions along the way. Dr. Potts sent me a really thorough list of questions, and I think I've addressed many of them, but not all of them. But I'm happy to be conversational. So we'll take some time to talk about facilitating classroom access in general. I'm assuming you all can see my slides okay? Awesome. Okay. So some of the things that came up in that list from you all is how to assist students who are neurodivergent. So neurodivergent describes students who are autistic, students with ADHD, students with a variety of learning differences. So we'll talk a little bit about what is neurodivergence. It is, I can tell you, very much the majority of students who receive accommodations have some diagnosis or set of diagnoses that would fall into this category. So again, autism, ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, specific learning disorders in math, specific learning disorders in reading. So again, that's kind of where a lot of our students who use accommodations are. How we know if we're meeting needs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time today talking about sort of meeting the requirements of a notice of accommodation specifically. I'm going to talk more broadly, more of that universal design concept, because that's the sort of thing that benefits all of our students. How to help students who struggle with essential components of a course. I will say this. So a student who has accommodations, we're not making any accommodations that change the learning outcomes of the course. So it's a great question to think about, how do you put in support? How do you pull in the Writing Center, for example, to make sure students are meeting those requirements? But just so you all know, I want to be really clear that there would never be a notice of accommodation that changes what the student is expected to learn over the course of a particular class. We'll talk a little bit about captioning. I've made an accessibility checklist for you, as well as a captioning specific checklist, because captioning can get really sticky. Talk a little bit about ESL students. The tricky thing with students who are English as a second language or English language learners, it's not a disability per se. So, but we'll talk about how these universal design principles really help students who are ESL, ELL students, even if they're not receiving accommodations per se. And then just really quickly, if you don't mind, are there certain things that you're hoping for? Even if we don't address it today, it's helpful for me to get a note from you all to know some of the other questions that are kind of coming up for you. I'll give you a second if you have anything to drop in the chat. Okay, we've got enough for our 40 minutes or so together. All right. Take a few minutes just to talk about neurodiversity in general. So this is one of those things, this is kind of an emerging movement, an emerging way to think about the ways in which people experience the world around them, the ways they think, the way they learn, the way they behave. So it's a strengths-based model that I think we're finding a lot of people are really thinking about in terms of a disability rights movement, civil rights movement. There's quite a bit of community around people who are identifying as neurodiverse in some way. And I think I've been seeing a lot of that in our students. The really cool thing about this is they're recognizing the ways in which they think and learn differently as strengths, but it creates some challenges sometimes when they're approaching their learning environment with one set of expectations that doesn't necessarily align with the expectations we may have for how we facilitate a learning environment. So again, fairly encompassing. So autism, ADHD, and different learning disabilities all fall under this broad bucket of what neurodiversity is. So there were some questions specifically, I know, about autism. Yeah, good question about how teaching online can be a little different. Thank you for that. So autism, it's very common. I think by some estimates, it's 1 in 80 people are autistic. So lots of people kind of going through the school system, coming to college are autistic. It is often under-recognized in girls and women. We could think about it sometimes as being something that's more common in males, men, but that's not necessarily the case. But oftentimes the hallmarks of autism are social, learning, and communication difficulties. Now, sometimes these are based on the way in which somebody who is neurodivergent approaches the world that is different from those people who are neurotypical. You know, sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but the learning, social, and communication difficulties are hallmark of autism. Sometimes, you know, there's a stereotype about autism. I often think about the stereotype of autism as like an 8-year-old boy who's obsessed with trains. And so that's not all autistic kids are really interested in trains, but oftentimes there's a really hyper-focused interest in certain areas, which is really neat. I mean, think about a learning environment, how you can harness that for good and for some really powerful outcomes as well. One of the things that is often uncomfortable in working with people who are autistic or autistic people is the direct communication. So there are all sorts of social rules that we go through the world, we start learning these social rules, the subtleties of that type of thing. For autistic people, interpreting those can be really difficult. And so sometimes that may be somebody stands too close to you when they have a question, or it may be that they don't understand that a conversation is wrapping up. And so oftentimes, if you are somebody who tends to understand social rules kind of inherently, the ways in which that you would directly communicate with somebody who's autistic can be really uncomfortable for you as the speaker. I've certainly run into that before, but direct is kind, I think, in many cases, but particularly here. But a lot of strengths that our autistic students have, oftentimes very attentive to detail, out-of-the-box thinkers. They may not necessarily see why things are done a certain way, which can really facilitate some creativity. Focus on areas of interest and good memory. But again, misreading social cues is something that I think a lot of our students here who are autistic struggle with. You know, some of the students who I work with pretty closely, they're not sure how to make friends, or they're not sure how to approach other students in social ways, and that can be a little bit of a challenge. Sometimes the things that people do, neurodivergent people in general do, that help relieve stress or help with focus can be a little bit make other people uncomfortable. It can be sort of outside of the way that you may expect a classroom environment to go. So for example, sometimes it's doodling. Sometimes people need to make certain body movements that help them remain focused. And so sometimes, again, in a classroom, somebody may look at the student who's using some of their strategies for stress relief and think that they maybe look weird or odd or strange, or it's uncomfortable. So classroom challenge that I know some of our students are facing right now. Changes and transitions can be difficult. Then sensory experiences may interfere with learning. There's certain fluorescent lights in different buildings around campus that buzz more loudly than others, and that can be really challenging for some people. Just that sensory input can be a lot. Another kind of form of neurodivergence is ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so there are a lot of words today. So kind of some tensions a lot of times for students with ADHD or people with ADHD. So one of the things that a lot of the students who I work with who have ADHD talk about is, when they really need to focus on something, they are so locked in, they're so focused. They like 6-week sessions many times because of that. But then also, it can be really hard to get ready to do an assignment or to pay attention in class or that sort of thing. Kind of another tension is both a lack of direction combined with an ability to direct energies into specific tasks, sometimes procrastinating, but then they can knock out really excellent work for an entire week in an afternoon. Again, some of the missed social cues, as well as deep intuition and empathy, and then both kind of impulsive decision-making and really creative ideas. This definition comes from a really fantastic book that I'm reading right now. I'm almost done with it. It's called ADHD 2.0 by Hallowell and Rady. So they're both physicians with who both have ADHD themselves, but it's a great book. It's really practical strategies for thriving as a person with ADHD. So I'm happy to recommend the book in more detail. There is a reference slide at the end as well, but it's a good read, an easy read, something that I found really useful. One of the things in our office we do a lot of is success coaching for students who use accommodations. Most of the students who use success coaching are students who have ADHD, because what we're able to do is a lot of support with some of those specific strategies for kind of managing tasks, task initiation, and that type of thing. And so the book's been really helpful in informing our practice. So many of you probably see this, whether or not you know that a student is neurodivergent or not. Of course, if a student has a notice of accommodation or an accommodation letter, they'll give that to you and it will outline their specific accommodations, but it doesn't say why they have accommodations. And that's theirs to share if they want to. It's not information I can share with you. That's not information that the students are required to share with you. But some of the things that will often come up are students may not understand what the rules of classroom etiquette really are, right? It might be that person who speaks out of turn, or it might be that person who's, raising their hand ready to answer every single question before you finished it. And so as an instructor, it can be frustrating. I've had experiences where I've been frustrated when it seemed like a student didn't understand what they were supposed to do in the classroom. Something I've really tried to work on is thinking about what is the point of this class session and what's really important here and what can I put to the side? And that can be a challenge. Unclear or inconsistent expectations. And this, I think, is tricky for students who find, so something that comes up sometimes is an unexpected pop quiz, or if a test date gets moved, or assignments get changed along the way. That can be particularly difficult for a student who's neurodivergent. Group work, real challenge in a lot of cases. There's so many social rules that go into group work in terms of who takes the lead, who does the work. I think we've all done group projects and are aware of the ways in which those can be stressful, but that can be particularly challenging for folks who are neurodivergent. Inattention and fidgeting. So this is something so many people need. So students with ADHD, people with ADHD in general, often need outside input, stimulation to focus. And so oftentimes you'll see that student who looks like maybe they're playing on their phone in class, or they're doing something that looks very inattentive. And it's frustrating, right? That is outside of the rules of what I think many of us would consider classroom etiquette or expectation. And so it can be really frustrating to see somebody who looks like they're completely tuned out. And it may be, sometimes, not always, it may be that they're using a device as a way to have a little bit of input that helps them stay focused. Some students I've been giving these out quite a bit lately, but they're called comm strips. They're these bumpy little stickers that people may put on their computer or on their phone or something. It's just a little bit of sensory input that people find sometimes helps with focus. So you may see students kind of fidgeting with something on their computer, and sometimes that's what that is. The out-of-the-box thinking sometimes can come through in questions that seem a little bit off task, or a little bit off of what your plan for your class session is. And then a strong sense of time is something that many students are challenged with. So a couple of quick tips along the way, and this works in both online and in-person classes, but be really explicit about what success in your class entails. what are the expectations really? And that might be being in your seat, ready to start class at 9:50 versus coming in at 9:50 and taking 3 minutes to get set up. It may be asking 3 questions per class session, sometimes giving that level of detail. If your expectation is a certain degree of engagement, it's really helpful. I think a lot of times it's easy to know, you know what you mean. Yeah, I can show you what a construct looks like. A box of them here. And so they are truly just these little stickers, and you can't really see much of them. They all have different textures on them. You're always welcome to come get them, but they're just really, they're subtle, but so many students, they're telling each other about them now. So they're just, again, it's not as distracting as those fidget spinners that people had a while ago, but it's just a nice way to have some sensory input. So good question. This is where we can work together with success coaching as well. It is explicit and specific as you can be about how to organize information and complete assignments. And this is good practice in general. This is definitely a universal design practice as well, but letting students know what it is that you're trying to do, what it is you expect of them, and the steps that they need to take to get there. So sometimes something we see a lot of in our success coaching is a student will come in and they know they have a final paper for a class, but they're not sure what the steps to get to the point of being able to complete that final paper actually are. And so they end up stuck, right? They're spinning. They're not sure where to even begin this process. And so as much, especially when you're in a 6-week session, it's hard, is you can be really explicit about the steps for organizing the tasks for assignment completion. It's helpful for everybody. Again, a detailed schedule and a predictable class routine. Something that I do when I teach SU 100 is I've been really explicit that we will take the first 5 minutes of class to answer questions about things that are due later in the week. And so it's always the beginning of class. One, I think it helps people get there on time, but it gives that predictable class routine so students know when we have space for those questions. And as much of a detailed schedule as you can do, this is hard for me. I like to be able to modify things as I go, to dig into certain areas. But as much as you can let students know exactly what to expect, the better. And again, these aren't specific to students with autism or students to ADHD, but these are the things that are really helpful for students in general. I think you'll find that a lot of students who are neurodivergent in some way, having the work of doing a pop-up written assignment. So I know sometimes people will do those 1-minute papers or those quick written assignments. That's a fine thing to do, but for somebody who struggles with reading, somebody who struggles with writing, somebody who is autistic, the time pressure as well as sort of the unexpectedness of that type of assignment can really make that student not perform to their ability. And so if you do those, fine, but think about making sure not to overemphasize those as much as you can. And then when you have to make changes, be prepared with why. I think sometimes I have to remember that when I make changes, I can share a little bit with students about why we're diverting from a schedule, especially for somebody who's autistic. That can make a really big difference to provide that context. It's one of those things that, again, it seems fairly straightforward, but being really intentional with the why is helpful. And then something that I know has come up for some different folks, we do have a student on our campus who's non-speaking. And there are different ways to think about engaging a student who's non-speaking in classes. So a couple of ideas. Does anybody use Kahoot? Okay, a couple of folks use Kahoot. It's a nice way. So basically you create an online quiz or kind of online questions. Students use their phones, which is a nice way too, to give students an opportunity to have the stimulation from outside devices as well. But to to have a way to participate, it'll somebody will win, every round of questions, it'll let you know who's in the lead. So it's sort of a gamification tool, but it's also a nice way to let somebody who has a variety of communication challenges participate in a way in your class. So Padlet also is a kind of a neat way to have a live chat feature that you can project either in the classroom or if you're doing an online session, either of those is a nice way to do that. And then you can use a chat feature. So if you're doing a shared Google Doc in the class, whether you're online or in person, you can let people participate in the chat kind of in real time versus raising their hand and verbalize what's going on. So all of those are some pretty good tools. And then of course, if you're doing online sessions, the chat feature can be good. But I'm wondering, do any of you have different ways that you facilitate participation that doesn't necessarily require somebody to speak aloud in class in addition to these?
One thing I've used some is called Miro. It's like a mapping concept map kind of
Mhm.
board, or you could use it for anything. It doesn't have to be just that, but it's like a collaborative workspace.
Mhm.
Like especially for them in groups and stuff. So
Mhm.
I don't know if anyone else has used that.
Something I also like to use is the groups feature in Canvas. So I don't know if you've ever put a group of people together in Canvas. So it creates a little homepage just for that group. There's some communication tools in that. They can put their shared Google document in there. So it's a nice little workspace that people can use. Again, especially for a group project, it gives people different ways to engage and participate that don't necessarily require. And again, not just a benefit for students who are neurodivergent, but students who are busy, students who have other commitments. It's just a nice way for engagement. I recognize that classroom discussion is a really, I think, valuable way to explore information together. And so I recognize that it can be challenging when somebody is non-speaking or not comfortable speaking up in class. But I think that there are a lot of students who may have social anxiety. Something I'm noticing a lot in some of our first and second year students who may have had high school disruptive. It seems like just social anxiety in general seems to be on the increase for a lot of people. So again, having these different ways students can participate is a really nice way to facilitate engagement that may be more comfortable for some people. So again, if you are teaching effective speaking and much of the class is based on the ability to speak effectively, these may not be the most appropriate things. It's a different conversation. But if the learning outcomes for your class are not necessarily speaking in a certain way, these can be really valuable.
Catherine.
Yeah.
Could I ask, in terms of having a student who is nonverbal, not by choice, but because of neurodivergence, is that something that can be addressed with a letter from your office that would then clearly tell the instructor, that an accommodation is required, and these are the tools that are available from the university to support it?
Yeah, so the way that the accommodation process in general works is when a student is seeking accommodations for the first time, it's a 3-step process. They provide documentation, they provide, there's an online application, and then we do an intake appointment. So we do an interactive process. And so I'm very cautious if a student is coming in and they are not sharing that they need that particular accommodation. I don't put stuff in a letter for somebody if they are not talking about how that will support them. So that can be a little bit of a gap sometimes, in some cases. However, that's not to say I'm really quick to ask a student what it is that they feel like can help them be successful. I think every student here who is receiving accommodations has had some things that have worked for them in the past. That's how they've made it to college, right? And so when a student lets me know, it works really well for me to have alternative means of communication, absolutely, that can be a really important part of the letter. And I can absolutely work with faculty to talk about what that actually looks like.
That's great to know. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions about that type of thing? So, like little things like group projects, right? Small group discussion. Give people warnings that they have 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, whatever, so that they're providing information. Something that is important too, sometimes you may ask a group in your class to have a small group discussion. Make sure, don't just provide the prompt verbally, give the prompt and instructions in written and verbal format. So many of our students benefit from having something, instructions in written format, and we don't always take the time to write those instructions out for somebody. So that's one of those intentionality pieces. I know sometimes it does, when you're having a great conversation and you initiate a question in real time, of course, you don't have it pre-printed, but if you can write it on the board for a student to refer back to, that's really helpful for students who may otherwise get lost. Success coaching, so you can refer students to success coaching. We're doing a lot of success coaching work with students on time management, task initiation, planning, that kind of those general academic skills. Many of our students are still practicing these skills. You don't have to be registered for accommodations to use success coaching, but it's just something that, I use ADHD a lot. It is the most common, the most frequent diagnosis that our students who have accommodations have. But you can give somebody an accommodation for extra time on exams or a distraction-reduced testing environment. And that is helpful, but it doesn't get at how to build skills and all of the independent work that students have to take on. So success coaching, I can't say that it solves everybody's problems or concerns all of the time, but it's a nice way to really try to give students that structure as they kind of take off and launch into their time as a student. And then as much as you can, make time for movement or brain breaks. I've started telling students that I don't mind if they stand up during class if that helps them. And I'm surprised at how many students take me up on that. So if that's not something that's going to throw off the way you do class, if it's not something you've tried before, but if it's something you're comfortable with, why not? I would much rather have somebody standing in the back of the room and engaging in class than completely zoned out. So. Questions before we jump in? So a lot of what I talked about, it is universal design principles. There's some great resources for universal design that I can share with you, but a lot of those practices, it's universal design for learning. It's one of those things that helps students access their learning environment in a variety of ways. And so there was a question about students who are English as a second language or English language learners. It doesn't fall under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but so many of these practices, so we'll get into captioning in a second, but the ability for a student who's learning English or for whom English is not their primary language, the ability to read both text and listen to audio concurrently is such a wonderful learning strategy for people. So the more you implement these, the more benefit you're going to see for ESL, ELL students. So captioning, I know that it can be a challenge. I'll get to that in a minute, but it helps so many students. I think we often think about captions for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So many students benefit from captions. And then again, so kind of the whole concept of UDL is multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. So I'm going to pivot to some very specific accessibility checklists, and I'll run through the elements.
Question. I was kind of thinking this as well, about how you mentioned like letting students stand up if that could be distracting to other students. I was kind of wondering the same thing, like you were saying, like some of the behaviors or like technique, like stress reducing techniques that some neurodivergent people may use could be distracting to others. So I guess, any advice about that, like the best way to kind of deal with that? And so, because I guess you want to be considerate of everyone's needs. So you don't want to seem like you're then just like singling these individuals out. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So my recommendation in that is if a student, finds stress reduction to be sighing very loudly during your lecture, or like a lot of vocalizations. Just an example, obviously that's incredibly disruptive. I would pull that student aside and kind of say, okay, I recognize that sighing very loudly is often something people do when they are stressed. What alternatives do you have? to that particular behavior, and I'm happy to work with the student too and kind of talk about, again, I think that sets expectations early on. It is fine if you need to do something that helps you focus standing in the back of the room. It is not fine if what you need to do to focus is creating challenges for the other people's learning in the classroom. And I mean, it can be really delicate because I think sometimes people don't think about the way sighing audibly throughout class can be disruptive to other people, but it is a real challenge. And, so I think, sometimes it does require pulling a student aside and kind of talking about that, or setting parameters for what does and doesn't work. Obviously, in a lab, what you can do to relieve stress is different from what you might experience in SU 100, but I would not. Again, I'm always happy to help, but obviously you can't prioritize somebody's stress relief techniques over the experience of other students in the class. So sometimes it's what's worked for you? How can we make this work for everybody in the classroom?
Okay.
Other questions before we, good students walking around the back of the class, be distracted by other students. I think, so something that I would encourage would be, so sometimes students will have preferential seating in their notice of accommodation. And that takes on a lot of different forms. I think sometimes you see preferential seating and you think, oh, they need to sit in the front row of class. For some students, it might be, and I know most people don't have assigned seats, but it may be that preferential seating for a student would be in the back corner of a classroom where if they need to stand up, they're not disrupting the first couple rows of class. Again, somebody who may need to stand up or walk around in a little bit of, or in the back of the classroom should plan to sit near the back of the classroom so they can do that while minimizing distraction. Some people sitting near a window, maybe the sunlight and the birds is some good input for them, and that actually helps focus. And so you may think, oh, preferential seating may be, sitting in the front row with no distraction. For some people, a little bit of input might be helpful. And one of the things I really want students to be able to do when they come to you, especially if they have preferential seating, is to articulate what works for them. So again, I don't put accommodations on people without talking or engaging with the student along the way. And so hopefully they can articulate what that means for them and how they can do it. And they can ask you. It's fine if they say, is it okay if I stand up? And if it's not going to work for your class, it's okay to say no. But they may need to have another strategy as well. Again, there are ways that a student can do it without disrupting the whole class. Obviously, somebody who's sitting in the front row, walking in and out of the classroom and refilling their water bottle 12 times, that's a whole different story than somebody who's just kind of leaning against the wall while they listen. Anything else before we unveil the whole checklist? So I do have a PDF version of this that I'm going to post on our website later today. So this is three slides length, but you'll have the PDF, and if you want a hard copy, let me know and I can send it to you, or I'll have hard copies in my office. But these are just general things as you're thinking about your courses in general. Many of these are already in effect. And so I know sometimes the thought about making sure a class is accessible can be really daunting. But if you're using Syllabus Assistant or any of the other syllabus tools, there's an accessibility statement in there with my contact information. I went through last year. They should be up to date. If you're not sure, let me know. I've also posted the accessibility language on the LibGuide for the Center for Accessibility and Learning Equity, so you can use that as well. Do students know how to contact the help desk? I recognize that that can be of minimal utility in a lot of cases, but at least are you directing students how to get there? Are you outlining communication expectations just in general? And then one of the big things for students is, so book orders. I think that they're supposed to be submitted 6 months in advance. I think it's what, April 15th and October 15th for book orders, something around those dates. We have more and more students for a variety of reasons who need alternative format textbooks. And so when those book orders aren't submitted to the bookstore by deadline. You know, when a student's registered for classes, we start working really early on making sure we have materials in a format that will work for them. If we go to the bookstore website a week before class starts and a book order is not up to date, it can really create issues and the student doesn't have their materials at the start of class. So that's kind of one of those things that it's really important. I think people don't always think about that from a standpoint of access. That's something to think about. The next thing is evolution with technology. So your standard Word document, your standard PDF, those are all really pretty accessibility friendly. Word has a nice accessibility checker. You know, so as long as you're creating your text where a student could copy and paste it if they needed to, and if you're using the kind of the built-in formatting tools that are built in, so I'll use Word for example. So if you're using the built-in header function within Word, if you're creating level headings in a document, those are much more compatible with a screen reader or other ways people are going to access stuff than if you create your own formatting. So, you know, kind of the details of how you use Word or whatever it is that you're using Excel, the more built-in features you use, the more accessible it's going to be when you're done, just in terms of how you format it and lay stuff out. There used to be a big issue with tables and screen readers, but it seems like now it's a lot more friendly if you're using the built-in table tools, again, into Word. If you're not sure, I won't take time right now, but if you're not sure, awesome, thank you, Donna. If you're not sure how to do the accessibility checker in Word or Canvas or any of those, I'm happy to show you. I'm not going to take time to do it right now. For any sort of PowerPoint presentations, again, the more Syllabus Assistant does have some limited editing functions. So what I did about a year ago was updated in all of the Syllabus Assistant templates. Mimi helped me, I think Mimi. So they all should be up to date, but if you find that it has Kelly Cover's contact information, let me know. I know that it's a little bit different, but those all should have had a bulk update last summer. So hopefully that's not the case anymore, but if it is, please let me know and I'll fix it.
Do you know, Catherine, and there was a question in the chat, if the Syllabus Assistant allows like some of that formatting functionality that you were talking about that's more accessible in terms of like the headings and stuff like that?
So Syllabus Assistant does okay, you know, especially if you use the PDF version. So that part's okay. Yeah, that part is okay. I know that the editing function is a little bit limited, but again, I think all the templates should be updated. If not, again, I'll make sure that they are. I can't update Syllabus Assistant myself. I have to have, it used to be Mimi that would do it. And I think it's Brandy now, but I'm, you know, a little limited. So no page numbers.
Actually, Catherine, it's not anybody. There's nobody with universal access anymore. Because I've been asking about that, and Brandy said she'd be willing to do it, but I've not been able to get anybody to, I guess, sanction it. I had sent information to Melissa, Kurt, and John.
Okay.
So if you can help with that.
Yeah, because I mean, I wager about 75% of all of the syllabuses are the same. So having that consistency is important. Yeah, absolutely. Good call out. PowerPoints as well. Okay, good to know. PowerPoints as well. Use the templates. Use what's already created there. Don't put in text box. Use the different layouts for PowerPoint that already exist. Again, if you're not sure how to do this, I can help. There are other people on campus that can help, you know, but as much as you use the formats that they're presented within whatever software you're using, those tend to work best from an accessibility standpoint. High contrast. I know sometimes it's fun to make your text look pretty or creative or that sort of thing, but as much as you can stick to black and white, like Calibri or Times New Roman fonts, 20 plus is ideal. All of that from an accessibility standpoint is ideal. Alt text is something that I think is maybe something that comes up sometimes that we haven't quite gotten to yet. I don't have any students right now who have requested alt text, but alt text is simply a text description for any image that gets posted on any material that you have. It doesn't provide, I mean, and it is truly just a description. So it might be, you know, woman in blue sweater drinks cup of coffee. You know, there's not a whole lot of information beyond what's in the image, but it would be something that somebody who has a visual impairment would be able to access. Again, accessibility checker. And so many students want to print out PowerPoints and bring them to class for note taking. So if you are able to make those available before class, where a student can bring them and use them as a note supplement, that can make such a big difference in many cases. This is the last page of the accessibility checklist, at least. So captioning, I do have a whole separate captioning checklist we'll tackle in a second, but making sure that any kind of media is captioned. That's one of those things where I think we don't have, I think we have some big gaps here, and I'm concerned about it. So there are certain standards. It's WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's currently 2.1 AA. It's very jargony, but that's the general standard that colleges and universities are supposed to adhere to on any sort of web material, any sort of web content, including classes. So we do have, a couple of years ago, there was a group that undertook looking at web accessibility for external stuff. So every Monday in my inbox, I get this overview of external, it's like broken links, all of that type of thing. But I think in our classes aren't assessed, but I know that there are gaps in having things that are captioned. And this is really tough because I know, especially if you're teaching a subject that has really specific language or jargon, the Canvas Studio it's not always accurate with what you're saying. But this is really one of those things that, one, is really easy for outside folks to notice. Do we have it or do we not? But really something that I would encourage is a high priority because it benefits. Sometimes people think, well, I don't have any deaf students in my class. I don't need to worry about that. No, I promise you, you have at least one student in your class who is neurodivergent in some way, who will also benefit from being able to access information in this way. So videos that are short in duration just work better for students. So 5 to 7 minutes, even if you're doing a series. If you have to record an entire lecture or, you know, an entire presentation like that, you can, but it makes it a lot harder for people to follow along. It also makes it harder to transcribe. And if you're doing podcasts or MP3s or other recorded media, do they have transcripts? The good news is that many, many, many organizations now do provide those transcripts. It's a lot easier to get even than it was about 5 years ago, because lots of organizations are adhering to the WCAG 2.1 standards. But if you need help, I can always help you with that. So, and then in Canvas in particular, hyperlinks should be embedded. So if you click here and then have a whole long URL string for something really specific, if it's like NM9XYZ, blah, 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 think what it would be like if you've got a screen reader reading that to you, right? All you're trying to do is read your introduction for Canvas for the class. You know, there's a web link and it's taking, you know, a full minute for your screen reader to announce an entire URL. So use shortened URLs, embed links whenever you can. Again, consistent organization is great. Large, bold fonts. Again, thankfully, there are some great Zoom features, but think about readability. I guess I lost my train of thought in that line. And then again, contrast, and the Canvas accessibility checker is nice too. So these are things, again, I have a one-page printout for this that you're welcome to use, but these are the things I would look at when you're preparing a class, whether in person or online, that I would go through and check to make sure that your materials are there. You know, I know that there was some discussion about this being a workshop. If you have certain materials that need to be updated, I'm happy to help you with that sort of thing. If you're not sure if your Word documents that you've been using for a couple of years meet some of these requirements, we can always play around with it and make sure that they're there. I think the good news about a lot of this work is that it's a practice that sometimes we have to develop. It's not that difficult to do. Once you start doing it, if you're not already in the habit, it's really not that hard. It's just sometimes changing the way that you're used to doing things. So, questions about this checklist? All right, let's talk a little bit about captioning specifically. So Canvas Studio purports to do about 85% accuracy when you do a spoken, if you record yourself doing something in Canvas and then you go in and you do the captions. Again, pretty easy, but it's about 85% accurate. The standard for captioning compliance is 97%. So that does mean it takes a little bit of work to go in, to respell some words, to change some punctuation around and make sure that your transcript is accurately reflected in what's actually being said. So for any recorded material, again, whether this is something you've created or content from the outside that you're using, the big thing with captioning is you want to make sure that none of the meaning is lost. So if, for example, there was, I sent off for captioning a video and it was about Appalachia, for example. And so there was a lot of some specific dialect pieces of that video, and it came back and it represented the dialect appropriately as it was spoken. So sometimes you want to make sure that the way somebody is actually speaking isn't corrected if it if it is specific to whatever is being said. You don't want to edit out any slang, sexual content, explicit content, even if it's spoken. If somebody who is a hearing person is going to hear it, the reader who's reading the captions should have the same experience in terms of what's being said. Even kind of little things like if there's background music, it should describe the background music. If somebody's using a lot of filler words, that should be included in captions. Speaker should be identified. Kind of all of these different things for any kind of recorded material are really important to make sure that captioning is there. And this can be a little bit daunting, I recognize that. So a couple of ways to make sure that you've got captioned materials. So I probably should have turned on the live transcript, but anytime you're doing Zoom, she'll do it now. There is the option to turn on a live transcript during a live session. So I will say that if you're doing, for example, a Zoom class and it's synchronous, the standard for captioning is lower for something that is live versus recorded. So if you're teaching your class just like this and you turn on that captioning feature for your class in Zoom, you're actually doing what you need to do. It's more the recorded materials that have the higher standard. So if you're using Zoom, if you're recording a class and you're going to share it with students, using the live transcript and record is a good starting place. You've got a nice record right there. Same thing with Canvas Studio captions. A good way to check, I would encourage you to try to watch some YouTube videos with the captions on if you've never had this experience, because many of them are very, very, very far off. So a quick and easy way to check if you're planning to use a YouTube video for your class, down at the bottom on a YouTube, there's a little CC, it stands for closed caption. You click that box. If you get a message that says captions are auto-generated, it means they've used artificial intelligence to create those captions, and they are likely to be pretty far off. If it says that the captions are in English, that's a good indicator that somebody has actually gone through and captioned those. So I would still review the video to make sure it works and that the captions match what's being said. But if it says auto-generated, I would be a lot more leery than if it says English in general. Oftentimes, I've had this work multiple times and it's wonderful. So if I need to get a transcript or appropriate captions for something, I'll just email whoever created it. Sometimes people have put stuff on YouTube and they had it auto-generated and they didn't think about having it professionally or appropriately captioned. and they'll like, oh, thanks for letting me know. I'll redo it. And then they send the new link. So I can't say that will always happen. I've had a great success record with that. So again, sometimes it's as simple as making that request. TED Talks. So sometimes people will use the YouTube version of a TED Talk. TED Talks themselves have fantastic transcripts. So if you're using a TED Talk, go right to the TED site versus the YouTube site, because they tend to have good transcripts. A lot of podcasts now do as well. If a student needs transcripts or captioning, I can work with them to show them how to access it. I notice some students aren't exactly sure what to do in different platforms or different types of things. But, you know, a lot of things already have them built in. So it doesn't, although it feels daunting, there are a lot of resources that already have some stuff built in along the way. And then if you do need something captioned, oh, thank you for turning on captioning. I can send stuff in to have it professionally captioned for you. It costs about $2 a minute for captioning, so it's not inexpensive to have done. But obviously, if that's what we need to do, that's what we'll do. The important thing, so it takes a couple days to turn around. We don't use in-house captioning, we use an outside organization, but it takes usually about 5 days for those captions to come back. What's really important is whenever you make something available to your class, the captions are available at the same time. So if you're opening your module for Sunday afternoon, you would need to have your caption video ready to go on Sunday afternoon for everybody in the class. So everybody has the same amount of time with the material. So we can absolutely do that if that's what needs to be done, but oftentimes you'll find that there are some other things before you reach that point. Questions about any of this stuff? Yeah, so oftentimes, so this is where we get really, it depends so much on individual students, but yeah, so PDF versions for students who use different types of screen reading tools work really, really well. And thankfully with screen readers now, Apple has a great screen reader. We have a lot of different things that I've been playing around with different students on, but yes, oftentimes a PDF will work really well for a student who needs something read aloud to them. I think Ezra activated the immersive reader function in all of the Canvas classes as well, which is nice because that is essentially a reader for anything that's posted in Canvas, which again, a lot of students really find value in, even if they don't have a documented disability that might, you know, that might have things read to them. You know, for students who have specific learning disorders in reading, for example, being able to hear the audio while they follow along with the words is a fantastic tool to help. So again, a lot of it's built in. Technology makes a lot of this easier for you and easier for the students as well. So there are some additional resources. There is a Kale LibGuide. I will tell you, LibGuides, building LibGuides is not my strength, and it's not where I want to spend my free time. And so it's a little bit messy right now, and I recognize that, and for that I apologize. However, if you go, you know, when you're on the library website, there's a Center for Accessibility LibGuide, and then there's a faculty resources section to circle here with some just simple kind of definitions of common accommodations, how to do different things, all of that kind of thing, links for the National Deaf Center, how to do certain things in Canvas for access, as well as Universal Design for Learning, as well as a link for the CTL. I'll put the checklists on here as well. I would like to clean it up, but I think that probably I'll put them on there and assume I'll find time somewhere else to clean it up a little bit, but those resources will be on there. I've been building this out when I get questions from folks. And so the more questions you have for me, the more resources I can create kind of for everybody who might need them. So this is kind of a space where I would encourage you to go for different types of information along the way. Again, it's not as robust as I would like for it to be. That's kind of an ongoing project. And then if you're interested, it's a neat neurodiversity initiative at the College of William and Mary. And again, that ADHD 2.0 book has been a good read as well. So for some additional information. So I know, let's see, short links and syllabus assistant. Oh, gosh. That's
Yeah,
a good-
that's me because like it does the whole thing and then it does the whole thing again in parentheses.
Yeah, that is, I mean, that does not, yeah. I'll have to look into that. That's a good-
Okay, yeah, maybe there's a setting that I just don't know about.
What I sometimes do is download my syllabus from Syllabus Assist as a PDF, then I
Uh-huh.
rename the PDF
Uh-huh.
and then upload the PDF into my Canvas page.
Okay.
That has
yeah.
a short name for the students.
For the students, okay. Yeah, and I've done that. My issue had been in the syllabus itself. Like if, say, I linked to the library website or something like that, it would include the full link and then include it again in parentheses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and where we really noticed at this time was with the suicide prevention language, because a couple of those links were like a whole page long.
Yikes.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. It's, it looks funky.
It does do that. I can ask Eric if there's a way that we could navigate around that,
Yeah,
or if there's something he could do to reset that.
yeah, that would be awesome. Thanks, Donna.
I have a question. How do you turn the live captioning on? Is that something that only the person who hit record can do?
I did it.
You did it? Okay. Well, are you all
Sorry.
seeing it? Is it supposed to be captioning right now? I don't see it.
Oh, I see it from my end where, see down at the bottom next to the share screen? And next to the record button?
Okay,
It should say show caption.
okay.
Yeah, I
So,
think it's just for the individual user. So like if you click it, then only you see it, but not everybody else sees it.
okay, okay.
I've been wanting to try that for a while to see how that worked out. So sorry, I tried it today.
There are different ways. So somebody, like a participant, can request it for, and then you can either, I think, make it available for everybody or just that person. But
Okay,
I am
I'm not-
recording and I just hit it, so now I am seeing the captions. But the nice thing is, too, after the event, you can, you have a saved transcript. So I think even if you're a participant, I think you may get a copy of that transcript, just like you can get a copy of the chat.
mhm,
I think that happens.
okay. Yeah, I see it. You just click the button, I guess, to turn it on. You don't have to change the settings. Okay, I never realized that was even a thing. So, thanks. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have sort of a question. When you all were talking about putting in the URL link in the Canvas, were you talking about like just when you were adding it to a module and just putting in the link? Is that what you were talking about? And it was coming up with just this long URL?
Yeah.
No, sorry. If that was for me, shoot, I don't have an example. No, it's not in Canvas. It's actually in Syllabus Assist.
Oh, and Syllabus Assist,
Mhm,
okay,
Yep.
okay.
Mhm.
Because I knew you could fix it in Canvas, but I don't think I've ever tried
Yeah,
it in Syllabus
Yeah,
Assist.
I'd figured it out in Canvas, but in Syllabus Assist, I've never been able to figure it out.
Okay, thanks.
same thing for emails as well, is doing the hyperlink versus just copying and pasting a link in there can make a big difference. So. And I mean, some of this is more technical stuff. I'm certainly happy to help you if you've got specific questions. I mean, we all are in different places with technology and how we use it, the things that are like a routine for you and I've never thought of, and vice versa. So if any of you have questions about how to actually do something granular, let me know. I'm happy to show you.
I will say, during the Quality Matters, one of the things was talking about accessibility, and oh my gosh, when you start going to some of those links and they're like on and on about what size and how you indent, and I'm like, oh my Lord, it's, it can be a little overwhelming. So I think it's really nice what you said is kind of hit the high points as to what kinds of things that we can all do, and then you can kind of work on things if you have problems.
And again, thankfully, so many of those tools now are built into things like Microsoft Word. So you read it and it's really daunting. You're like, okay, if I'm just using the indent feature versus hitting the space bar 5 times, that,
Right.
you know, that gets you where you need to go for that sort of thing.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you all for joining us today. Our next professional development for TEC will be on January 3rd. That's going to be in person at Breakout Room. We have some nursing faculty that are going to share that. So I think that, or escape room, either whichever way you want to call it. So that should be pretty interesting too. And then Donna will be sending out the recording for this, correct? So you can stay tuned for that. And also just we'll put it out there if you all ever have any kind of like ideas or topics that you're interested or questions that might be good for us to address in one of these, send them my way and we'll see if we can, work that in. So thank you all. Thanks again, Catherine. Really appreciate it.